This is Dialogue. Dialogue, a presentation of the Public Affairs and Special Events Department of KLRB News.
This is Dialogue Assassination with research specialist Mae Brussell. For KLRB, I'm Gloria Barron.
I'm Mae Brussell.
Yes. We'll start right off, Mae. Last week, I think it was, we received a call from Buff Cody, Representative Bert Talcott's representative in his Salinas office, and telling Phil Kogan that the Washington offices had been deluged with mail concerning this program. They didn't know how to answer or what to answer all the mail that they had received. They wanted to know who is Mae Brussell. And the Senate Library wants copies of the tapes.
That's great.
I'll just turn that over to you, Mae, and maybe you can answer a few of those.
All right, I'll answer. You know, from the beginning of the shows, Gloria, we've asked people to write letters to their public officials and tell them they want to know why national security is involved in not getting the truth about the Kennedy assassinations, and we told them to write about any subject that we mentioned, the evidence in Los Angeles about the Robert Kennedy assassination, the two weapons, and the ballistic confusion down there. We've covered a lot of things, and I've asked people to write, and they are writing. And Representative Talcott called that Washington his word was deluged with mail. And I'm really proud of you listeners. Most of you are under a certain age group listening to a rock station, and people think you're lazy or lethargic or you've dropped out. And it shows you're not dropping out and that you care about your world. And I am really very, very proud of you. And now I'm going to make a point. I'll tell you what I answered Mr. Cody, because he was to phone Representative Talcott. And I'm going to make a point to you in regard to that answer. Mr. Talcott is in Europe now till September 5th on a fact-finding trip. And I'm going to ask all the listeners now, don't write any more letters until Congress comes back into session. I told you, Gloria, that I sent out letters to every senator during Christmas vacation so that there would be information on their desk in 1970 about the assassinations. And between December and January, when they recessed, I had sent out 700 letters to members of Congress, first class. And the response to the letter which I sent out, which was also to law schools, writers, researchers, the response I got made that effort worthwhile. But not one member of Congress answered that 10-page typewritten letter I sent. And there are people in the intelligence agency in every office of every congressman. And if they would get a personal first-class letter, say 30 or 40, from one person, it would cause interest. But when 700 arrived, I am absolutely convinced that they were removed and thrown away from their bins. And I would like to speak to the men someday. I don't think they received them. And when I was in New Orleans with Jim Garrison a few years ago, and was in the office where the man who had volunteered to help him was working, Tom Bethel, I saw mail come in for Jim, and Tom would read it and throw it in the wastebasket. And this is at the time new evidence was coming in. And I was shocked. I was working over at the filing cabinet. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, these are letters from all kinds of people, and we don't have the money to answer. We don't have the staff. We can't handle all this." And he threw it away. And there may have been a link that Jim Garrison could use. So I'm going to ask everybody, if you hear something on the show today, and I hope you do it every day, make a note and write a letter. And where the because if you do it a month later, you'll lose interest. And where you place the postage stamp, put a date, September 15th, and mail it that day, anytime around that time when they get back. That doesn't mean the congressmen are going to see it, but they won't stand a chance. This, I can go, every week we promise an hour show, an hour of this, an hour of that. we could talk about the handling of the mail from my personal experiences. So write your letters. Do write them. They received them. But they're away now, and they're traveling all around. They're campaigning for 72, and they're at the beaches and all over the world. They're not going to see it, and the chances are they may never see it. It's not going to be on the top of their desk when they get home. So save it. Now, what I said, I called Mr. Cody because he was to call Representative Talcott, and they didn't know how to answer back there. And I said, Mr. Cody, this is a unique situation because for 7 years, people in Washington have had their cover stories on how to handle the researchers. They have their pat answers, and I'll read them to you. And I said, this is the time I don't fit into any bag that they have. And I think they know it back there because they really know who I am, and they have received other correspondence. And the times now are to tell the truth. So the pat answers don't fit. The first pat answer they always gave was national security, that we can't divulge what you want because of national security. And I said, we are on the air now 7 or 8 weeks, and I've broken down as well as I could that this is not a problem. We're not going to be invaded because of this. It's not going to hurt our foreign policy. This is the security of a handful of people over the majority of the people. National security will not, if the congressman write back, we can't go into it because of national security, that doesn't hold because the people know, and the tapes are going east, and people are making cassettes, and the people know, so that doesn't work. The next cover story they always used was no new evidence. Well, I read on a show to you the fact that the area that I'm going into is all new evidence. Even at the minutes of the meeting of April 30th, Senator Cooper says the area that we're weak is the part of Oswald going to the Soviet Union, coming home, the State Department. That is the area I spent 7 years on. So if they say there's no new evidence, they haven't seen any of this evidence, and none of the books out have anything to do with the material that I've researched for 7 years, not one of them. The next cover story they use is loners or misfits and mercenaries are making a fast buck. I don't fit that description. I went into my background, my education, the university I went to, Stanford, my family's background, all the way back to my great-grandmother who founded the I. Magnin stores in San Francisco. And my family are fifth-generation California establishment family. A boy from Watsonville wrote, how can I convince my father about some of this? He's establishment. I wrote him back that I'm establishment, too. I have a huge home, a lot of bedrooms and baths and grounds and stocks and bonds, and I'm establishment, too, so I don't fit that bag anymore. They can't use that one on me. Now, then they have another cover they use. Our investigators convince us about thus and so. Well, at the April 30th meeting of the Warren Commission, and we'll refer to it on several shows, Gloria, over and over again, when Mark Lane and Thomas Buchanan were coming out with assertions about something that was happening in Dallas. This was the end of April, and the commission had 4 more months to work. Earl Warren suggested that we call the president of the Associated Press and the president of the United Press down to send a man to meet with the Warren Commission, and if they have any problems on their mind, the commission would go into them. And we'll repeat this several times because it's important. The way they handled the rumors of what they called rumors of Mark Lane, who had been down at the grassy knoll and talked with witnesses and had an altogether different picture, Earl Warren didn't say, let's call in Mark Lane and Buchanan because they have something that we don't know. They said the way we will handle those people will be to call in the president of the Associated Press and the United Press. So all they get is their cover story. If it is a CIA conspiracy, the cover story is set. So they say, well, this is what we have, and they're quoting themselves. So I said to Mr. Curry, there's only one way we can handle this, and I suggest it would be very nice if when Mr. Talcott returns from Europe that you come to my home with him, because he'll be going back to Washington, and by then they'll know even more about what we know, because I'm sharing it with you. And then he can go back and discuss it intelligently. So that was the gist of our conversation, and I will look forward. If he doesn't see me, if he's afraid to see me, because then he can say, well, I've seen it. If he doesn't want to see it, that's something different, because we're reaching the people now, and we'll go on and find the truth with or without Mr. Talcott. But because he represents us in the area, I would like to think that he'd be the first congressman who has an opportunity to see my material.
It would be very nice if he would make that appointment. Let's hope that they can arrange that.
Yeah.
But it would take quite a bit of time, wouldn't it, Mae, to go through your go through all that material? Or
I wouldn't show him all of it, but I did. Speaking of time, I did say to Mr. Cody, you schedule the appointments, but you may not schedule more than just 1 hour. You know, you have to give me 4 hours, have lunch, and stay from 1 to 5. And he said, well, Mr. Talcott's a very busy man. I said, never mind. You know, he's off in Europe, and he plays golf at Pebble Beach. And if you're scheduling 1 hour in my home, you're not invited into my home. Because in 4 or 5 hours, I can show him something that he can take back to Washington as an intelligent man. Not that he believes or disbelieves, but this is what she has, and he can't see it in less than 5 hours. He can't see anything in 5 hours, but he can get the gist of the extensive research, and he will know he has touched something very real. And then he can handle it from there, because there's no way now to sit on and pretend it doesn't exist.
yeah, I was thinking 4 or 5 hours is really a very short time. Our first meeting was like an 8-hour
we ran for 8 hours.
And that was just
Did I talk
cursory.
Did I talk that long? Did we have lunch?
So now Mr. Talcott is receiving the tapes, or he will receive them. He will receive them.
Yes.
And
I'm also
they are listening. We know that they are listening now.
Yeah, I'm also advising Phil at the station here to make copies, cassettes of them, and not to mail them to Washington, because nobody who would be interested in these tapes will see them till September. And there is no reason for them to look up stuff and rearrange it and have another cover story where they can get on the Associated Press or the news media and flatly refute this or that. They can sit with them at their leisure when they return, but there's no one now who would be able to handle this who's in Washington. So we'll hold them up, until September, and they'll all arrive when the men get back to work.
On one of the shows, was it the last one, Mae? You mentioned Jack Anderson.
Oh,
yeah,
the news,
Assassination Balderdash article.
Yeah.
There was, you brought out the fact that our local papers here didn't carry portions of that article, and that the New Orleans paper did carry an extra added.
Yeah, we were talking about
extra paragraph. Right?
Every week we talk about news control.
Yeah, right.
And what you do is some things never go over the AP-UP wire. And some papers delete what goes. And people say to me, well, why do you have to read 6 or 7 newspapers a day? If you finished your research, what good did the papers do? Well, on July 27th, 1971, Jack Anderson had an article about Spiro Agnew in Kenya, about how his aide was kicking up, embarrassing him, and so forth. But at the end of the article, there was a column that was in the New Orleans paper. Now, Jack Anderson had a column that day in the San Francisco Chronicle, in the San Jose Mercury, the Monterey Peninsula Herald. And it didn't cover the last 3 sentences or paragraphs that the New Orleans paper did on the same date. At the bottom of the New Orleans paper, there's a lead article that says, Assassination Balderdash. Now, I went to the Random House Dictionary. The definition of balderdash is a senseless jumble of words or nonsense. Now, what was the balderdash that Jack Anderson wrote about that was in New Orleans that wasn't in our newspapers? This is the article. A new and far-fetched theory of the assassination of President Kennedy, Senator Robert Kennedy, Dr. Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X is circulating on Capitol Hill. It is contained in a 14-page report, buttressed by various documents, which was put together by Don Riley, a labor union employee and assassination buff from San Francisco. Its conclusion is that all 4 were killed by the same, in quotes, conspirators: CIA agents, anti-Castro Cubans, some Dallas police, FBI operatives, states' writers, Nazis, a clique of the very conservative businessmen, mostly oil, and right-wing religious leaders, end quote. Jack Anderson says we have criticized every one of these groups at one time or another. But our own investigations convince us that this new theory, as earnest and ingenious as it may be, is pure balderdash. Now, at the time our shows were breaking here, and we were talking about a weekly program discussing the assassinations and how they're newsworthy and they're in the news every week, and we want people to become conscious about these articles, Jack Anderson is saying that his investigation convinces him that this is wrong. Now, I want to make a statement because you come home, most people are working during the day, they have their dinner, they turn on the TV, and they open up the paper, and they read columnists like Jack Anderson, Tom Wicker, Harrison Salisbury, James Reston, Walter Lippmann, Rowan Evans, Robert Novak, and William Buckley. They read all these men, and whoever they like, crossing party lines, and they believe what they read. And those articles, these men, should be writing their opinions, like my opinion is, Jack Anderson should have said, my opinion is that this is far-fetched. Or I don't happen to agree with it, it seems too broad, or too many people are involved. That's my opinion. But he said that his investigation convinces him that this is balderdash. And so what I want to do today, and these tapes are going to Washington, and I will make an extra cassette to Jack Anderson, I want to challenge him in front of the people listening all over the country, these are going all over the country, that the columnists should put up or shut up once and for all, and that I will meet Jack Anderson's investigators of this 14-page document anytime, any place in the United States, and he can invite any 10 congressmen, no party lines, not radicals, not conservatives, to meet with us. 10 congressmen, 2 or more should be black because he's mentioning Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. And we will meet his investigators with me. Now, I have never known the name Don Riley, Gloria. I know a lot of the researchers in the country. I've never heard of him. When I saw the article, I called information in San Francisco to rap with him. He wasn't listed. So I wanted to get on, but it's more effective to me to meet them in Washington in the fall, his investigation where he rules these people out, to say that I, Mae Brussell, in Carmel, never knowing a Don Riley existed, finished my research on the John Kennedy assassination till where I was satisfied how it went. And it is exactly what that 14-page document has in Washington. And when I was all finished with the research that I wanted to do, to sit down to write 5 continuous books, each different on the subject, people would say, and I had to do this for my own head, well, Mae, what are your conclusions? How did it really work? What are people making broad statements about the CIA, the FBI? What do you really think happened? And if you have a pencil and if you have a paper, I will give you briefly, you and Jack Anderson, a rundown. I'm not going to name all the names. I'll name them to him in front of the members of Congress, but I will give you an outline briefly of the way the operation worked, the way I figured it out, which is identical to that 14-page document sitting in Washington. And I can't stress too much how I resent these columnists. Either they are part of the conspiracy. There were 2 conspiracies, one to murder and one to cover up. And many in the cover-up, we know who they were in Life magazine or in New York Times or the columnists. If they're either part of the conspiracy to cover up, or they are stupid or uninformed. And I will inform Mr. Anderson, and I will catch him up on what happened if he is not part of the conspiracy to put him down. Incidentally, Jack Anderson could look in his files of Drew Pearson. He inherited the column. He used to work with him. I had 5 letters, and they're in my file, dated to Drew Pearson, to investigate particular Nazis in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that were involved in the assassination, and this correspondence was going on in 1964 and 1965. And I had telephone conversations with Drew Pearson, I have the dates at home, about the people that Don Riley is mentioning now. So if you have a pencil and paper, I will give you a brief idea of how I will meet Mr. Anderson. At the very top on the left-hand side, leave your paper cling, I'm on the very top on the left-hand side, is a particular man in Army intelligence. And down below that name is J. Edgar Hoover, straight line down. And below that name is Richard Helms and Alan Dulles of the CIA. Now, the agents of the CIA had two branches. To the left was Lee Oswald, who met with 6 particular people. And to the right was Marina Oswald, who met alone with 5 particular people who connect to the oil people and Nazis, who connect to Army intelligence, motorcade, police, and secret security, and the decisions of where John Kennedy would pass that day. That's your left-hand column. Now to the right, way over, is another man, a Nazi, a member of the John Birch Society, who gave a speech in Boston 2 years ago on the 4th of July that all Jews in this country should be vaporized. He was dropped from the Birch Society, at least overtly, because he came out too much in the open. And below his name is the name of another gentleman of the CIA who worked with, there is a connection here, with a group that have never been yet exposed that I refer in my research as the Munich gang. They are military police, they are counterintelligence decoders who worked in Munich, Germany, and arrived in the Fort Worth area. The first one arrived in October 1962, and they filtered in a group of them. There were about 20 altogether that never were called as witnesses before the Warren Commission. The only one that was called before the commission, will go into his name, and I'll tell you why he was called, perjured himself. And I will read the perjury on the air and show you that I challenged Jack Anderson to go into my years of research, because I have a chart of the man from the CIA who worked with the oil people, and where those people met with Ruby, who met with the Munich gang. I call them the Munich gang. And my diagram is so tight that I can refute anything in the Warren report and back it up with thousands of pages of document. Now, when we meet, Mr. Anderson and I ever meet with the Congressman Gloria, we'll turn to the Warren report, page 292, describing right-wing groups hostile to President Kennedy. Now, Jack Anderson, July 27, 1971, is saying this is all balderdash, this theory about the Dallas-Fort Worth area. The Warren report gave 6 pages on the right-wing group out of hundreds of pages of research, 6 pages into this area, and only called 1 witness out of many, many, many who could have been called. And this is what they said. Quotes, the commission considered the possibility that there may have been a link between Oswald and certain groups which had bitterly denounced President Kennedy and his policies prior to the president's trip to Dallas. But they went into the connections, and they found no connection of Oswald to this group at all, except the fact that he had attended one meeting of General Walker's, a big rally. Well, in order to prove a conspiracy in Dallas, Lee Oswald didn't have to know any of the oil people at all. He didn't have to know any gunman on the knoll. He was on what we refer to as a need-to-know basis, Gloria. So all Oswald had to know to do a particular thing, which was namely to be a decoy, was to get a position in the depository few weeks prior to the trip to Texas. You had to have people decide which route you take. And there's a new book on that subject. We're going to do a whole show on how the Governor Conley insisted on taking this particular route instead of another. There's a new book that just came out. I read the review last night by men of the Secret Service who had terrible guilt about Kennedy's death, and they're writing a new book. Oswald had to be in that building, and he had to leave the building, and the others were told, if the doors were closed, you can't leave, we're going to examine the building. And he would be picked up because he was the only one who left the building. That is a decoy. A patsy is when you plant the evidence against them, because he was very confident and cocky for 2 days. Then he panicked and realized what would happen. Then he was shot. But Oswald, the Warren Commission says, because he didn't know these oil people. But if the person in oil exploration was connected and introduced him to the people who got the job in the depository, and we mentioned these names, he didn't have to know the other people. Then the Warren report goes on. The day of the assassination, in the newspaper, in the Dallas Morning News, was a black-bordered article said, "Welcome, Mr. Kennedy." And it was signed by Bernard Weissman of a fact-finding committee. And Mr. Weissman was called to say, why did you put this ad? It had P.O. Box 1792, and it accused Mr. Kennedy of favoring communists. It had many, many points. And they called Bernard Weissman to testify why he placed this ad. And Bernard Weissman, in his testimony, said, I came to Dallas in November 1963. As soon as he came to Dallas, he met the people who were to pay the money for the ad. They were members of the John Birch Society. They were to use him. He came out for the purpose, he said, to use my name because it was Jewish, the day of the assassination, Bernard Weissman. The committee didn't exist. They wanted a Jewish name to tie in. If the cover story, Oswald was a communist, they could say all Jews are communists, so Reuben Weissman. They were to use this thing and play it up later, maybe, and to instigate people to get excited. And after he placed the ad, he went home, back to New York. That was his sole purpose, and a correspondence of letters that he received from the people. Bernard Weissman came from Munich, Germany, and he was a group of this team that siphoned into Dallas. Larry Schmidt was the one who arrived in 1962 from New Orleans, wrote immediately to Munich. I was here the first night, and he met with these wealthy oil people and operators. We're in. We got more than we ever wanted. We'll be financed. Our goals will be set. Everything is set. And then just in November, he writes to New York to Bernard Weissman, you have to come here now. We have to produce the bodies and run, or they won't believe us. We've got to get going. You know, this is now or never. And you will be briefed when you come to town, like I was, or Larry. He says, we will give you a briefing. And Bernard Weissman comes to town. Now, why, if the Birch Society believes that Kennedy is not giving the country a fair shake, why don't they just, if they're paying for the ad, sign their names? If they are honest conservatives, and they feel that Mr. Kennedy is doing the wrong thing, just say, I, Mr. Hunt, don't like what you're doing. Why do you have to use a Jewish name to hide your name? Or why don't you say the Birch Society disagrees with your policies because you're favoring communists? Why make up a Bernard Weissman said he had to write the name of the group on his cuff when he went to place the ad because he couldn't remember what it was. So they use him, and they gave him a pitch. This is interesting. They gave him a pitch, a letter to come to town now, and it's written by Larry Schmidt, and it was based on heroism. You've got to be a hero. I've put my head on the line. All great people do. You have to be willing to die for what you're doing. And he also wrote in his letters, Larry Schmidt wrote to these boys in New York and in Germany, when you arrive, don't talk your liberal talk or they'll catch on to us. And remember to call a nigger and not a Negro. He talked about money to be received. They were well-heeled. They talked about the banks and the money they were saving and putting into the Republic National Bank. This is the kind of conversation that the public doesn't know about, Gloria, you see. So Bernard Weissman is, in the Warren Report, is telling how he came to the area. Now, all the commission wanted to do in ruling out a conspiracy is saying we went into the origin of the man who placed the ad, and he didn't know Oswald. Now, there is no reason in the world why Bernard Weissman would have to know Oswald, except that Weissman received letters from Larry Schmidt. We've opened this nightclub, and I have 20% interest in that nightclub, and I got Betty a job as a stripper in this club. If Lee Harvey Oswald knows those people in the nightclub, not Lee Harvey Oswald, if Jack Ruby knows those people in the nightclub and knows the oil people and is in their home and in their office and at their banks and sees them at the Mercantile Building and the Republic National Bank, and I'll name other places. If Jack Ruby knows the people that came from town, that's all that matters.
Excuse me, Mae.
Yeah.
You're listening to Dialogue Assassination with Mae Brussell. Stereo FM, Carmel by the Sea.
Now, the Warren Report, in showing that there was no conspiracy with the oil people or the Dallas community, as we said before, ruled out the fact that Lee Harvey Oswald knew the oil people, which doesn't really hold it all. As I said, he doesn't have to know them. Then they went into Bernard Weissman, and they said, in quotes, "We did a full-scale investigation into the genesis of this advertisement, a full-scale investigation into the genesis of this advertisement and the background of those responsible for it. 3 of the 4 men chiefly responsible were Bernard Weissman, William Burley, and Larry Schmidt, who served together in the U.S. Army in Munich, Germany in 1962. That's what the Warren Report said. What they don't say is that they were counterintelligence, decoders, like we said, military policemen. It says they just served together in Munich, Germany. And they were satisfied that these men were not involved in conspiracy. It says upon their release from the military service, Weissman and Burley did not immediately move to Dallas. In October the 1st, 1963, Schmidt told them that big things are happening. This is what he wrote to them. Now, when they say they conducted a full-scale investigation, the Warren Report says 3 of the 4 men responsible for the ad. They don't mention the 4th man, who is Larry Jones. Why doesn't the Warren Commission say 4 men were responsible for the ad, 4 men were in Munich, Germany? The Warren Report that you buy mentions 3 names and leaves out a 4th name, Larry Jones. Now, the day of the assassination...
Who is Larry Jones?
Well, Larry Jones was one of the men in Munich, Germany, with 3 men. But why doesn't the Warren Report say 4 men were together? They said the commission, this is page 295, conducted a full investigation. 3 of the 4 men served together in the U.S. Army in Munich, Germany. Now, when Bernard Weissman, who was allowed to use a fictitious name to hide who paid for the ad, a Jewish name to hide who was behind it, was called before the commission. He was the only member, and I have a list of 28 people who have to be called back to Washington. On page 490 in volume 5, Mr. Jenner said to Bernard Weissman, "What other buddies do you have in the Army with whom you again renewed your acquaintance when you were discharged and went to Dallas?" And Bernard Weissman said, "Only one besides Larry," meaning Larry Schmidt, and that was Bill Burley. Now, under sworn testimony, he says those were the men in the Fort Worth, Dallas area at the time of the assassination. When I turn to volume 23, a Mr. Siegel from a carpet company that was the front where Mr. Weissman was supposed to be working with Bill Burley when they arrived. They didn't sell a carpet. They didn't call on any person. They weren't peddling carpets, but that is where they checked in. And they were there at a meeting the morning of the assassination. And Mr. Siegel testified that at the end of the meeting there was a telephone call to, this is volume 18, page 846. There was a telephone call to meet Larry Jones for lunch. They'd be at the usual place with his brother, and after the assassination, that noon they would meet for lunch. The day of the assassination, Larry Jones called, and Bernard Weissman said, "Oh, I don't know who Jones is." But in the volumes, volume 18, 846, you see that Larry Jones was in Munich, Germany. Now, in volume 18, page 890, a gentleman named Ken Glazebrook, a political analysis division of their organization. This group in Munich had an organization called CUSA, C-U-S-A, which we will talk about. And Ken Glazebrook is mentioned when Bernard Weissman was called as a witness. He mentions that he went in Dallas to the bus station on November the 22nd and picked up November 22nd, 1963, and picked up Ken Glazebrook. Now, Ken's name is in the correspondence. He was in Munich, Germany, and knew these men. Then he went on to the Middle East, and he siphoned into town, and Bernard Weissman is saying before the commission that he picked Ken up November the 22nd, 1963, at the bus station, and in the same testimony to Jenner, he's saying that he didn't know anyone from the German area except 2 men, Bill Burley and Larry Schmidt. So right there, you see the commission, Mr. Jenner is taking his word that there was Larry Schmidt and Bill Burley in the Dallas area. And when he says, "I picked up a friend, Ken," Mr. Jenner hasn't read the correspondence that Ken was in Munich. So the commission lawyers don't even know who the witness is talking about. So there's no way that Jack Anderson can tell me his investigation is going to match my investigation. And it's so serious, Claire. I take it serious. I really do. Because you are being told we've gone into this. He says, my investigation. And he has not gone into it. And I'll show you how the Warren Report made errors in this area and how they got into trouble. They only had 6 pages, as I say, in the whole area. And Don Riley in San Francisco has this 14-page document mentioning people. Now, the Warren Report goes into another handbill, which says wanted for treason, that was printed the 2 days before the assassination and was passed all over town. And the man who did this printing and was involved with it, the Johnson Printing Company, is a partner of General Walker. You have to remember that General Walker was removed from service by the administration because there was so much right-wing activity going on in organizing with the military over in Germany. And the Warren Commission rules out the fact that General Walker knew Ruby. No, they don't say that. They rule out that he knew Oswald. And when they want to go into the back thing, they say that they went into the men who placed that ad, wanted for treason, that handbill, the day of the assassination, the day before it was passed all over the streets. And they were satisfied that Mr. Klaus and Mr. Surrey and General Walker, who all testified, were unacquainted with Lee Harvey Oswald. This is page 299. The commission found no evidence of any connection between those responsible for the handbill and Lee Harvey Oswald or the assassination. Now, Howard Duff told the Secret Service that he was an employee of General Walker and saw Jack Ruby in his home 2 times. But Howard Duff was never called because when the Secret Service wanted him, he called his ex-wife and said, I would be killed if I talked. And Howard Duff has never been seen or heard. And the connection of, there's a strata now of, I have to explain, and I'm giving Mr. Jack Anderson, he'll get this tape, and he has 5 weeks to work before Congress comes back if we ever meet. I'm giving him some leads. There were 3 stratas in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. One was a very right-wing, fanatical, extremist group that Don Riley's talking about, connected with the church covers in that area, and they have links all over the country and places in Mexico that they send operatives out of. Then there is another group from Munich, Germany, that moved into town who could meet with these right-wing fanatics and talk about some really heavy things in their letters back and forth that implied that they had no political background. They were doing this for money. They would do anything for money. They met with the money people. They were involved with nightclubs, with the clubs. They banked at the Republic National Bank, which was listed in the Foundation's articles in the New York Times in 1967 as a source of black money. They met at the places where Ruby met, and they were connecting links of all these people. Now, none of those had anything to do with Lee Harvey Oswald. The Warren Report, and going into the assumption that Oswald did the whole thing, wants you to think that if Oswald didn't see the oil people, if Oswald didn't know the Munich boys, and if Oswald did it, then none of the others were involved. And if you take a heavy link chain, I did a diagram of a link chain of what it would require to take off an assassination, and you fill in everything, the motorcade, how you get the job, the weapon, and all these things. And if any link is weak, the whole thing won't hold up. But if there are connecting places that tighten that link, then it holds together. So if, under the conspiracies, the Warren Commission has ruled out that there's no evidence of a connection because they didn't know Oswald, they didn't have to know Lee Harvey Oswald at all. I think that, now, where did the commission miss the point on a conspiracy? If Don Riley is pointing out his 14-page document, I'll tell you how I came to some of my conclusions and what I think about it. In the first place, they told you they conducted a full-scale investigation. And I have a list, I say a group from Nazi mentality, Nazi talking, about Jews, about blacks, about a white Christian world, a group that was in Munich, Germany, that siphoned into the Dallas-Fort Worth area that the commission didn't call as witnesses. So one of the gross errors is whoever selected the witnesses, and this was controlled too by the CIA, they chose the ones that they wanted to hear. And they could say, we had the grandest investigation in the whole land. We had 552 witnesses. If they had 30 of those witnesses and the 300 I want, because I have no reason to be selective other than that they seem to know something, I would select different witnesses. So they called the wrong witnesses, and when they meet, maybe we can get 20 or 30 of these other people back. Then there were a group of people who had foreknowledge of the assassination. And I have the name. Somebody, for example, at Knott's Berry Farm would talk about the way Kennedy was being killed 2 weeks before the assassination, or someone in Miami. There's a tape recording of the way Kennedy would be killed. A gun would be taken apart, put together in the building. A man, a decoy, would leave the building. The chief of police in Miami notified the Secret Service, so they airlifted John Kennedy into Miami 2 weeks before the assassination. He didn't want an assassination in Miami, but it happened 2 weeks later in Dallas. So people had foreknowledge of the assassination, and you have to say, what organization, what street did they work on? I have Commerce Street. I have the organizations, the places they meet, the restaurants, the banks, the nightclubs, they all converged. People who had foreknowledge in California, San Antonio, Fort Worth, and Dallas, or Miami, New Orleans, or Alabama, all converged and had a contact on Commerce Street in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Now, the other problem was that the commission didn't attend the meetings. At the meeting of Bernard Weissman, when he's the only man from this whole area that we're talking about now, was called, and he was only called because he had used his fictitious name in committee which didn't exist. They really didn't want any more information from him. Bernard Weissman had most of the members of the commission at the meeting, and when he began to talk about a secret organization that wanted to take over the United States government by 1969 or 1972, just when he got on the subject, there is this organization, Chief Justice Earl Warren said, "Will you excuse me, please?" He had something else to do. Now, Earl Warren can always say, "I didn't hear what it was," because he had something else to do. A few minutes later, Bernard Weissman is talking and perjuring himself and leaving things out and not being asked the right questions. Gerald Ford is now chairman, and Gerald Ford says, "Mr. Boggs, would you take over? I have to leave the room." And Gerald Ford leaves the room. Then Mr. Boggs takes over. So you're left with Chairman Boggs and Allen Dulles of the CIA to hear Bernard Weissman talk about an organization that wanted to take over the United States government. Now, they didn't call the right people. They didn't attend when the men were talking, they didn't even attend those things. Now, when a witness is using a cover-up, like Bernard Weissman, or a cover story about the use of his name, that there was no organization, he had no purpose in Dallas, and he had heavy contacts, they never were able to follow or check the perjury. They missed there. And when they called a witness, the partner of General Walker, who printed the handbill wanted for treason, he was the only man who used the Fifth Amendment. And I should add up how many times. I have a book of statistics. Maybe it was 20, 30, 40 times. He's the only witness out of 552 witnesses who used the Fifth Amendment to not perjure himself. And in the introduction to the Warren Report, they say, in this investigation, we will not allow the Fifth Amendment to be used because it is so important to get the evidence. So they have in the minutes of the meeting when the Warren Commission was formed that they should not allow protection by the Fifth Amendment, and the only man who used it over and over and over again was this particular man out of 552 in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He pleaded the Fifth Amendment. So the link of conspiracy for Mr. Jack Anderson or people who are listening is very, very heavy, Gloria. I will welcome a chance, and you people can write a letter now tonight and say, will the Monterey Herald, this is a good letter to write, or call the Monterey Herald and say, could you please print the Jack Anderson article on the assassination that was in the New Orleans paper, because they get the whole thing. If it was deleted, we have a program that is the only one in the United States on political assassinations. You know, we're unique, and we could jump off the Dallas area and go into that London paper, Gloria. We're unique. This is the only weekly show on the air anywhere talking about political assassinations. And Joe Jostein in Europe, he lives in Gutenberg, Germany. He wrote the very first book on the John Kennedy murder. It was called Oswald, Assassin or Fall Guy. and I'll write the book someday, Oswald, The Decoy to Patsy. He has written 8 books on the Kennedy assassination, and he has a newsletter. Somebody wrote in or called in and wanted a newsletter that I could send out every week, and I don't have the money. If anyone would give me the money, I would do it. You know, it takes time and money to print it and distribute it. And he has a monthly newsletter for researchers who are interested in the assassinations. If any of you want to write to him or subscribe, his name is Joachim, Joachim, I guess it is, Joesten, 7890, Gutenberg, Germany. I'll say that again. Maybe people who want a newsletter, he's right on. He's saying things just as they come off once a month, and you'll get it. And it isn't very expensive. I don't remember the cost. Send him a letter and ask him the cost, and you'll get 4 or 5 pages every month. Joesten, 7890, Gutenberg, Germany. He carries report on the Garrison case, the Los Angeles Police Department, the Robert Kennedy, James Ray, the lawsuits, and the Chappaquiddick. Every month he has a newsletter, a continuous thing, a page on what's developed. And I received a letter from him from Germany Friday. I didn't even have a chance to read the newsletter. And this week I received another one, and I read that immediately because it was important. He doesn't send them out that close together. And what was he saying? He was saying that in London, a man who used to work for the Defense Department, Fletcher Prouty, who was a lieutenant colonel, was invited on British Broadcasting to talk about the Pentagon Papers and the meaning to American history and what's happening now. And he took London by surprise on the show called 24 Hours and suggested that there was a possible CIA involvement in the killing of the 2 Kennedy boys. Now, when we went on the air, Gloria, and you asked me to come in and explain our very first dialogue, it was just a rap session on the Pentagon Papers, and I said, we'll have to get into the assassination of John Kennedy. So, in Carmel, California, on KLRB, and in London, the London Times carried a headline story, and the Munich paper had a headline, a full-page article, and the headline read, "New charge against the U.S. intelligence agency CIA. Was it responsible for the Kennedy assassination?" And Joe Justine, I told him about our broadcast here, and he's going to have an article in his newspaper about KLRB that will go all over Europe, and I've written several other articles for his paper, so that while we're talking in Carmel, little sleepy, quiet Carmel, about what the national, international problems, this Mr. Prouty, he was a liaison between the defense and the CIA in London, was talking about memos he saw in the Pentagon. He is linking them.
I remember now where I heard about him.
Where was that?
I think he was on Jim Eason's program on KGO.
Somebody heard him up there.
Right.
Yeah. Was he talking? Did they talk to him in London?
He was doing the same thing, yes.
How long ago was that?
It was just about a month ago, so I think maybe we better contact Jim and see.
Get the tapes of that
Yeah,
show?
maybe we can.
Maybe we could tie the two together.
At least you might be able to listen to them. And
well, they wanted me up there about a year and a half ago. They wanted me on the show, but I didn't go up. I wasn't ready yet to go out into the public with the material I had because I felt I would be harassed, and I wanted to wind up what I was doing and go through those 26 volumes over and over again with a fine-tooth comb before I went out and could say this is positively so, based upon my research. Yeah, somebody heard him up there. A friend of mine heard him.
Yeah. A friend of mine did too, and it just while you were talking, it finally gelled. I remembered where I had heard about it.
Yeah, well, this is a city that's known for its artists.
Well, I think this is
musicians.
what is happening. We've talked about this before. We have Ellsberg, and now we have Prouty, and of course we have Mae Brussell right here. But it's coming down now.
You see, what happened is while we were talking here and making our tapes, he was talking in London about the assassination, and this particular man, Don Riley, in San Francisco, brought Capitol Hill this document, and I'm sure that what is happening back in Washington, it came just before the vacation. Everyone wants to get home, and most of the people are out working. They don't care at all, the McGoverns and the Muskies and the Ted Kennedys. They couldn't care less about what we're saying. But there's certain people in positions of power and with an intellectual curiosity, like Mendel Rivers, who wanted the My Lai thing. There are honest, decent conservatives who want to know. And Washington realizes now that they have something real. This is why I said they can't wrap it up or put it in a bag. They have something that they're going to have to go into. They can't ignore it because we're worlds apart. I don't know either of those two men. And I'm sitting with you and saying it has to be told now, and the evidence is there. And here's Mr. Prouty, who has seen memos and intimating he's seen them. And he's valuable like an Ellsberg because he has seen the working memos. And I will be valuable because I have 7 years of unwinding.
I think it would be interesting, to say the least, if you and Mr. Riley could get together.
If somebody, this program goes up to the Santa Cruz area and then reaches north, if somebody knows Don Riley, maybe we could, or maybe we could get, him down here.
Why not? That's great.
But I think in some way, Gloria, it would be more effective. You see, Washington kind of wants everyone to bunch together. Like at the time of the witness of the polka dot dress in the Ambassador Hotel, a woman, Sandy Serrano, heard this lady scream out by the steps, "I saw him and we killed him," and she had this polka dot dress and a gentleman was with her. Well, Sandy Serrano was mingling around the room and another man heard the same thing. So the two of them talked about what they heard, and then when they wanted to say there was no conspiracy in Los Angeles, they said that Mr. Pierre and Sandy Serrano got together and had talked about the polka dot dress, so one may have impressed the other person, and therefore it didn't exist. I think it's more effective if I go to Washington myself with my work and meet Mr. Anderson's investigator and not seeing that 14-page document and say that how can a woman living in Carmel, taking care of a home, a philosophy major, no special training in any kind of a thing, how can she see it when the men in Washington, they either see it or they don't want to see it? I'll show it to them, or they're going to say, no, it's not true. Let me just read one thing. Gloria, is our time running out?
Yeah, we have about 10
When
more
you
minutes.
write your letters, and we talk about writing letters to public officials, you're going to have to reach anyone or everyone, and it's not going to be Richard Nixon or John Mitchell. And I want to read you a section of a book, because we're talking about the news of the week. U.S. News and World Report has an article this week on the number one man in the cabinet in controversy. His name, of course, is John Mitchell. He is the foe of civil rights. He's the designer of the Southern Strategy. He is the fellow, this is quotes, who can change the president's mind. He advises across the board the highest policy meetings. Now, he makes all the decisions. He was the campaign chairman for Richard Nixon. The article goes on to say, I have many articles on my filing cabinet of the background of Nixon and his law firm, but this is this week's U.S. News World Report, August the 2nd. He did not know Nixon. He was not a Nixon convert or belonged to the group of Californians associated with him. It wasn't until Mr. Nixon suffered 2 election defeats for president and governor of California that Mr. Nixon and Mr. Mitchell got together and became friends and law partners. Now, John Mitchell wouldn't want a loser. He wouldn't want a loser, would he? So he takes Richard Nixon and, as a campaign manager, grooms him for president and changes his mind now. When I talk about covert governments or police states, I talk about Mr. Puppet Richard Nixon. But I'm going to read you fast, we're almost off the air, from Penn Jones Jr.'s book, Forgive My Grief, Volume 3. Penn Jones has written 3 books on the Kennedy assassination. He lives in Texas. On page 84 and 85, the chapter is called The Head Man Was in Dallas. And he goes into the newspaper, the Dallas Times-Herald, reports society parties of various people in the area constantly, of Mrs. Clint Murchison, the oil family, or Paul Rogatorodski, and she describes meetings at their home. But Penn Jones says, now I'm going to read the entire quotation. Forgive My Grief is the name of the book, page 85, volume 3. An earlier unreported Murchison party was much more important than those of recent years. This party was held the night of November the 21st, 1963, at the Murchison home, and we think was the cover for an important conference of the assassination staff. We always felt that before the president was killed, a staff conference was held somewhere and the elements of the assassination plot were present. At first they thought it was in Sykes, Louisiana, but that was the lower-level operatives. When it was realized that the assassination of President Kennedy was more important than the Normandy invasion with General Eisenhower in command, the conference for the Dallas Project becomes essential. The killing of President Kennedy was the most important takeover of a country in our world history. All the major forces in this country were involved. Riley says the FBI, the CIA. quote again, all the major forces in the country were involved and had to be accounted for at the final conference before the strike. So a conference was necessary, and that conference was held. Since Richard M. Nixon and J. Edgar Hoover were in the Murchison home that night, November 21st, the night before the assassination, we feel we should report that that conference was held in that home, not in front of the partygoers, but on the premises, and J. Edgar Hoover, the task force commander, was present to confer with his troops, to issue last-minute instructions to review their final plans, and to give the word to go or to cancel as necessary. That nobody, when you read about the assassination, talks about Richard Nixon being in town at the time that John Kennedy was there. That is Penn Jones. I think it is very clear when you're writing to people that you have to go beyond the team that's in office now. You cannot let them tell you, we have gone into it. It is not true. If people like Senator Proxmire or Senator Fulbright or a handful of people who want to go into examining the situations in Washington or want to sue the president for holding up billions of dollars that haven't been allocated, I have a list of people who feel something's wrong, and it's up to those people, if they feel something's wrong, is to take this evidence. They should either put up or shut up now. It's time for them, if they're uninformed, I will inform them. You just write to them and say, we are hearing these things. Mae Brussell wants to see you. Save your letters. There's another letter, and date it and send it off. Mae Brussell will meet with any of you, anytime, any day. And if you don't want to know, just say you're in a police state and this is the way it is, and that there will be no elections in 72. Just say it, and call it what it is. That's all. Don't play with our heads. Don't mess around with us. But if you're just uninformed, she's here now, and she will inform you.
Thank you, Mae.
You've been listening to Dialogue. Dialogue is a presentation of the Public Affairs and Special Events Department of KLRB News.